everybody, and welcome to Backspace, an author in fantastic start. Hi everybody, and welcome to the Backspace, an author interview series with me, Amy Rosenfeld. Today I am joined by JM Celi. Hi!
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining in. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing, just like a brief summary, so that you guys will be able to know more about him?
Sure. I write fantasy fiction, and I have something in the works about a half succubus who's trying to escape hell and go to the mortal world where it's much better.
Love that. Yeah, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that later, but yeah, we're gonna just get started, get straight into the interview with Mr. JM Celi himself. Woo! Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Sound of Music has taught us well. When did you first find out that you were into writing, or that you wanted to, I guess, write novels or get really into creative writing?
It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, I've always dabbled in it all through my 20s and 30s, but I had the creative outlet of role-playing games. I would kind of fall back and tell my stories there, or sometimes I'd write comics. I make amateur comics. I don't really publish them or share them with a lot of people, but I kind of get my stories out and show my friends, like, look at this, And it got to the point where some of the stories that I wanted to tell couldn't really be conveyed through a role-playing game or a comic book, and I needed to write an actual novel, and that's kind of where I landed. And that was probably maybe 7 years ago, where I was just like, okay, I need to write a book. This needs to be a book.
I definitely feel that, because I've had experience both in story writing and in film, and it's, very interesting how, like, the different kinds of stories you can come up with for each, but then you're like, there's no way that this film will be able to translate into a book well.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you remember, I guess, some of the early kinds of comics stories and the stories that you told through tabletop gaming? Do you remember much of them?
Oh, sure. I mean, I still role play. I still play D&D and all that.
Of course.
I remember a lot of the games that I played through high school and everything like that, but some of my early comics were, a lot of them were superhero based, because that was like comics, superheroes, of course.
Yeah.
But I also wrote comics of Cynthia, who's the main character of my work in progress, the novel I'm looking to publish. I tried to tell her story via comic books several times. I have a couple of like halvesy kind of completed stuff. And it's a lot of work, because it's just all the drawing and lettering and coloring stuff. So her story was just too massive. It was a lot of fun making them, but it was just a lot of work.
Yeah, like you talking about the lettering and the drawing, I didn't even think of that. I was like, of course, it's like something you got to consider when you're like doing something that's like a comic, but like I didn't even consider like, oh yeah, you have to do that as well. That must take a lot of time. So you said that Dungeons, Dragons, and like RPGs and stuff like that, they inspired the stories that you created and the writing that you are currently doing now a little bit. Is there anything else that you say would inspire you or has inspired you?
Sometimes movies inspire me. Sometimes music inspires me. Sometimes I'll listen to a song or something like that. I'll have like a scene in my head, and then I'll listen to music, and it suddenly becomes like the soundtrack of what I'm thinking of. Like I can picture people doing stuff to that song or piece of music or whatever. Yeah, I'm inspired by all sorts of stuff.
Was there anything specific or like anything that had like a big impact on you?
Yeah, I read these books called the Dragonlance series in the 80s.
Ooh.
And they're Dungeons and Dragons novels. And this was before Forgotten Realms and all this kind of stuff became like the gold standard of Dungeons and Dragons. The cool thing about Dragonlance was they kind of broke the mold of what the traditional, these are the races you can play. You're only allowed to be a dwarf or a human or an elf or a right? And Dragonlance came in and they're like, now you can play a Minotaur or a lizard man, and I'm like, what? I loved it. I'm like, oh, they're breaking the rules. You can do crazy shit in Dragonlance, you know? So I went and I wanted to make my own world in Dungeons and Dragons and basically blow the lid off everything and say, you can play whatever you want to play. I mean, I had a player's handbook of all these different races you can be. And one of them was a half succubus. I created Cynthia. Where is she? That one.
There she is.
Over there. I created Cynthia. The character was a player character of mine who was a half succubus, and I played on this world. And her backstory became the novels that I'm looking to write, now. But it started with this book series called Dragonlance. And if you come across them, I don't know how well they would have stood the test of time because writing styles change over the decades, but they really, really inspired me to create and get where I am today.
Yeah, and I think I've just got a couple more books to add to my TBR after hearing that. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be checking some of those out or seeing if I can find them anywhere. In terms of your actual sort of creative writing that you do now, what would you say would be some of the highlights or like the things that you really, really love about doing writing?
Oh, wow. A couple of things. Like, I love that feeling you get when you write a good scene.
Yes.
You know it too. When you finish a scene and you're like, oh, you get the feels or whatever. You're just like, There's been times where I had to like leave my desk, like I'm writing and I just like boom, 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 bam. And I'm like, I need to walk around. I need to like decompress sometimes when I walk. That kind of feeling, I never got that feeling when I was writing comics or even like playing in a role-playing game. This is something more, I don't know, personal or something. It was something stronger than that. And I thought that was really cool. And the other thing that I really love about the process of writing is, giving it to someone and getting, kind of accolades, like people saying, I like this work, getting good feedback and someone enjoying my work. That's a really good feeling. Sometimes I draw, I have some art that I do sometimes. And if I show my friends, hey, look, I drew this. Hey, that's cool. That's a good feeling. But something about writing just makes it stronger. I don't know. It's when my wife read it and she liked it, I was like, oh, good,
Yeah.
It's a good feeling, real good feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Because, like, I don't know, you just, like, spend so much time into, like, writing some of this stuff, eh? And then just to, like, hear somebody genuinely like it, it's just a really big reassurance, and it just, like, fills you with that sort of emotion, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, pour so much of yourself and your thoughts and your time into this work in progress, and to have someone, kind of affirm, no, you didn't waste your time. This was good. I liked it. You're not going to please everyone, and you'll have critique partners that'll point out, hey, this isn't, and that's okay. But to get that kind of general acceptance of I liked it is a real good feeling.
Let's go to the flip side of that now. What would you say would be the challenges or the harder parts of writing that you face?
Oh, that would definitely be time management. Just having the time to do it. And, I'm married, I have a son, I have a full-time job, and, those things take priority. And writing has to come, after all that stuff. I try to set some time aside, and I'll tell my wife, I want to, I'll say, I got to take tonight as a writing day, and she'd be like, no problem, it's never an issue, but it's always like, it's definitely time I have to take away from my family to do it. Cranking out a book when you have other things to do, which I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure a lot of writers are thinking, finding the time. It's tough. That would be the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you there, for sure. We just wish writing would be like at least number 5,
Yeah. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about your work in progress. How about you tell us the title and a little bit more about it? You've already mentioned Cynthia and her story a couple of times.
Well, it's called The Flower in Hell, and it's about a half succubus. She's half human, half succubus. She lives in the fifth circle of hell, and she is understandably miserable. What happens is her 20-something season, time moves differently in hell, or it's measured differently in hell. After her certain birthday, when she's supposed to have manifested her magic, it doesn't come. That causes problems because her mother had told her stepfather, oh yeah, don't worry about Cynthia, even though she's a half succubus and she can't reap souls like other succubi can. We're gonna put magic in her so she'll have other ways to contribute and to reap souls. And you'll have plenty of souls. Don't worry about that. And her magic doesn't come. So now her stepfather's like, well, she's useless. Let's just, why is she hanging around eating our food and wasting time? Let's just kill her, And it turns out that the whole idea of her magic reaping souls was a lie to begin with, because her mother doesn't want her for that. She's got some secret plot where she's going to smuggle her to the mortal world. For what? We don't know. Some nefarious plan that her mother has. Cynthia doesn't really care. She's like, why? Whatever you need to tell my stepfather, I don't care. Just get me to the mortal world. Get me out of this place. This place is horrible. And she befriends some people along the way, some souls that she meets and becomes their friends, and she makes some enemies along the way, including a rival demon lord who forces her to spy on her stepfather, the very demon lord who wants to kill her. She's now put in this really dangerous position of having to spy on him, and all these kind of things are coming at her, assassins and plots and all this kind of stuff. And all the while, she's trying to maintain some sort of semblance of value where she won't be thrown into this pit to be executed. So it's all about her trying to survive long enough to get out of hell.
I'm instantly hooked. I'm a Dungeons and Dragons player myself, and my go-to race has always been like the tiefling and stuff like that. And so I was just curious as to way back when you were doing your RPG stuff, what was your inspiration around creating Cynthia and therefore creating this entire hell-centric kind of story?
Funny you did mention that, because tieflings didn't exist in D&D when I created this player character race. Basically what I did was I flipped through the monster manual and I thought, what would be a cool player character race that's a little off the beaten path? And they had things like half demons and half devils and stuff like that. And in D&D they're called alu demons. Whatever, they're half succubi. And I thought, yeah, we're gonna go with this one. A few years later, Dungeons and Dragons come up with tiefling. I'm like, come on, mine are cooler. I'm just saying.
I agree. I love succubus-based things. One of my favorite monsters of all time.
What's funny is I actually pitched my campaign setting to Dungeons and Dragons. It was the company was called TSR back then, before Wizards of the Coast bought them. And we got a rejection letter, me and my friend, and we pitched this whole thing. This is what it's this, and these player characters. And they were like, we're taking on too many things right now. We're not looking at outside projects. We have Spelljammer and Hollow World and some other thing they said. And then a few years later, and believe me, I don't think that they ripped me off or anything like that, because I didn't give them any details of what I had. But I watched slowly as D&D became all the things that I had, and I'm like, I did that in the 80s. No, they didn't take it from me, but I'm just like,
you were one of the building blocks.
I got rejected, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. I was just so invested in you, talking about, your, underdog's kind of story about getting...
It's funny, because we kind of laugh about it now. My friend and I, who submitted the pitch for this world, incidentally, this world is the world of my high fantasy setting where Cynthia is trying to get to. So she's trying to get to the world that I created in the early 90s or whenever it was.
Looking on the version that you have now, compared to, I guess, sort of like your earlier creations of like the half succubus and your world, how much of it would you say is like directly linked to the Dungeons and Dragons based things versus like how much it is evolved, or I guess lack of evolved now?
Yeah, that is an awesome question, because I had to kind of like really discipline myself to like peel away all the D&D from it. So originally, like, all my magic was like, oh, this is a fly spell, and this is this spell, and this is and I'm like, I can't do this, even if it's not like I'm gonna get sued necessarily. My readers are gonna be like, this is just D&D. What is it? This is a ripoff, So I had to create a whole other magic system and how magic works and all this kind of stuff. I had to really be careful about how I was depicting the different races and things like that, which was cool because I kind of did that already, where I wanted to make them my own. So I kind of had a little bit done, but yeah, I definitely had to be very careful about what I did, because I didn't want someone to look at this and be able to easily peer back, pull the curtain back and go, this is just D&D. What's this guy doing? I really had to build a lot of stuff from scratch. In fact, I'll give you some inside scoop here. Cynthia's stepfather, his name is Melbraxa. And if you're familiar with the monster manual or anything like this, there's a demon lord named Grazit. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Grazit. And he's this big, powerful demon lord. And that was basically in Cynthia's original Dungeons and Dragons story. That was her stepfather, and I couldn't use him, of course. So I created this other, demon lord, and the rival demon lord that's basically making Cynthia spy on him. His name is Aslgoth, and in the original version of her story, it was Demogorgon. I think a lot of people may have heard of Demogorgon.
Yeah, that's a big name.
Yeah, so in Demogorgon, if you're familiar with this demon from Dungeons and Dragons, he's got 2 baboon heads, and Aslgoth has 3 bat heads. I don't know that people are going to look at that and go, that's Demogorgon, but he was. But I had to change the names. I had to completely change what he looked like, give him a different name, make him a completely different person. But I basically just plucked in a new villain in the place of a Dungeons and Dragons monster or being,
Yeah, because I don't know, I was definitely a later player to Dungeons and Dragons. I've only been playing for about 2 years, but I'm already starting to see some of those Dungeons and Dragons influences in my writing. Literally, writing the sequel to my own novel, ASTER'S CODA, there's literally a moment where I was just like, what spell should this character use here? Why not Cloud of Daggers? And I was just like, okay, let's leave that as a placeholder. We'll have to change the name later.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess we'll go spoiler-free with this. Any highlights that you have had in the process of writing A Flower in Hell? Any favorite parts of the process? Any favorite scenes during the drafting process that you are okay with disclosing? I don't want to spoil anybody here.
Yeah, I can't obviously tell you the what, but I can tell you that there were moments that, so I consider myself a bit of a plantser. So I do plot, I write an outline, and then what happens is I can't write a super detailed outline where I'm writing every nugget of what happens in fine detail. I have high points of what happens. I know what's going to happen, and then I kind of pants how to get from A to B in the moment. I know what needs to happen, and I stay with those beats. Every now and then I go, whoop. It turned out that some of my favorite moments writing were these moments where I just veered right off because I felt like the story was taking me. Now I know it's me, but you know what I mean? I just felt like that's where it was going, and I just let it,
Yeah.
If you're a writer, I think you know what I'm talking about, where you just kind of let it, you don't, if you're in the middle of writing a scene and you stop and go, this isn't supposed to happen, and go back to your outline, I don't know that that's a good thing. I think you need to kind of go with your heart in that moment and what feels right, especially if you're in the head or in the voice of your character. And, when you were kind of yourself thinking objectively as the writer, writing a plot, an outline, you're not in that zone necessarily. Maybe you should be. I wasn't, and but when you're actually writing words on a page, suddenly I'm like in Cynthia's head more than I was when I was outlining her, if that makes any sense. And suddenly, I'm going over here, and then I have to go back afterwards to my outline and go, okay, now I need to, but those ended up being the best moments because they were just so, I don't know, it was really like my heart was really pulling me there, and I think they were creating these really impactful scenes.
Kind of reminded of all those videos where it's like, the characters are writing the story, not me. That's the kind of vibes I seem to be getting. Yeah. Yeah,
and some people dump on that kind of mentality. I've heard Stephen King say, this is where my characters took me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling that way or, having that kind of outlook. I mean, of course it's you. Everybody knows you're writing the words. But get in kind of this zone. I don't think you should ignore it. You should embrace it and let the current take you where it wants to go. And you know what? If it ends up sucking, you can edit it later. It's okay.
Yeah, I think we'll break it up. We've got like a little bit of, I guess, a mini game in here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little thing that I'm going to be doing with the Backspace series that every guest that I have, we're just going to be playing a little fun sort of game to sort of break the tension, get you guys a little bit interested, maybe have our audience playing along. This is a game that's inspired by this TikTok series. I cannot remember who it is, but it's called 1-Star Review Guess Who. What's going to be happening is I'm going to be saying a bunch of reviews that I got off Goodreads from a very popular book, but they're all 1 star. And based on these reviews, you're going to have to guess which popular book or book series that I'm talking about.
All right.
Some of these are really funny. Your first clue is, this book can appeal only to a linguist. The underlying story is great, but it's buried under an avalanche of horribly annoying songs and poems that do nothing to advance the story. Any guesses?
It's a popular book, right?
Yes.
Now, I have not read this book, and I know it's super popular, but is it Name the Wind?
It is not Name the Wind.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Round 2. No, I never finished this set of books. Truth be told, I can't. They're awful and horribly written. For me, I found the author to be self-indulgent in their writing.
It's not the Wheel of Time, is it?
It's not the Wheel of Time.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. I think there's a great story there. The author, however, falls prey to the ever-tempting, look what a cool world I created syndrome, rather than telling the story that just happens to take place in the cool world.
These are getting harder. Okay, I'm blanking on the name of the series that Sanderson wrote.
Okay, I think I know which one you're talking about, and it's not that one.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of it either. Can be summarized as walking, 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 bit of fighting with orcs, walking, 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 anguish, walking, 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 bit more fighting with orcs, walking, walking, walking.
Oh, Lord of the Rings trilogy.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy is correct.
So I have a sinful confession to make as a fantasy writer and reader. I never finished The Hobbit. I DNF'd The Hobbit, and I DNF'd Fellowship of the Rings. Hobbit, where I DNF'd, was he was describing 12 dwarves? I don't know how many dwarves were going into Bilbo's house. I remember he described every single cloak, the color of the cloak, and the name of the dwarf, and his lineage, son of blah, blah, blah. This went on for it felt like pages.
Wow.
And I had already slogged through, I don't know how much, just world building, non-story, blah. And I was like, done. This was high school, so I never went back to it. After much convincing, my friends told me, give Lord of the Rings a try. I saw the Peter Jackson movies. I loved them. I'm like, all right. I started Fellowship of the Ring. I got halfway through it. Halfway. They had just left the Shire. Just.
Wow.
I'm like, what are you writing? Like, Fellowship of the what? Fellowship of the Walking Through the Meadow? Like, I was out. I know they're beloved and they're classic, and I talk about these series on my channel because I saw the movies, and that's my dark confession.
Well, I guess my confession's even darker because I'm from New Zealand, where it was filmed, and I haven't even seen the films. Haven't touched the books, so I'm worse than you. I had the darker confession.
Wow. Have you gone to the
I've been to Weta Workshops down in Wellington, and that's like Weta Workshops was like the main team involved with the special effects side of things. And they had some of the stuff on showcase there. So like I've been there probably twice to see the stuff based around that, but like I admire it for like the technical stuff that has been done in the movies, but yeah, I just I haven't been drawn to it. My citizenship has now been renounced publicly on the internet.
Oh no. No, I do respect Tolkien for what he did because he had a vision. He pulled a lot from Scandinavian and Germanic mythology and lore to create this world. And Gary Gygax, who's pretty much credited as the guy that created Dungeons and Dragons, he basically looked at Lord of the Rings and said, let's do that, So as much as I love D&D and I was raised on Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, I gotta respect Lord of the Rings, but I couldn't get through the source material.
I feel you. Definitely like respecting it for like the cultural impact that it has made on fiction as a whole, but just not jumping on the bandwagon of the following.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you mentioned before, you've got your own channel, your AuthorTube channel, and one of my favorite videos, or my favorite videos to watch that come for you, has been your videos where you talk about different creatures and stuff of the like, and just diving deep into their mythology and misconceptions and stuff. So I just wanted to ask, what got you so interested in studying those kinds of things?
I think, again, it started with Dungeons and Dragons, where you get something like a monster manual. And for me, the first time I ever heard of these kind of mythological creatures or, Celtic creatures and stuff was from Dungeons and Dragons. That stemmed out into a, I want to learn more type of idea where I would go and research more about them. I think it was really just being exposed to it at an early age and just wanting to know more, and then getting really passionate about a few select personal faves that I love and wanting to share on my channel kind of what I learned, especially for kind of supernatural creatures or beings that I think are underrepresented in fantasy fiction or represented, I don't want to say wrong, but represented far and away from the original folklore or myths or stories that were told about them.
Yeah, like the your first of those videos, the sirens. They were never fish people.
No. And that's always like, and I was trying to be diplomatic in my video where I'm like, hey, if you like mermaid, I almost wish I had just said, no, you cannot. But the whole point of the sirens was that they were stranded on this island. They were outcast. If they were mermaids, they'd just be like, screw you, out of here, That's not their story, and they were stuck on the island.
Do you have any favorite creatures or a favorite sort of cultural places that you study creatures?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a favorite. I love learning about all different kinds of cultures. I think, I kind of cut my teeth on all the European stuff, which would have been like a lot of Celtic and Scandinavian stuff, because that's kind of what was the bulk of Dungeons and Dragons, was taken from that kind of material. But the more I learn about stuff from like Asian folklore and African folklore and Native American folklore and stuff. When I say Native American, I mean everything from North America, South America, all the way down, like the incredible mythology and supernatural beings that they have, Polynesian stuff. I mean, there's so much wonderful stories out there. And I'm never going to have a shortage of, who to talk about on my creature spotlights on my channel, that's for sure, because there's just so much great stuff out there, and I love it all.
Yep, literally an entire world worth.
Yeah.
Are there any other creatures that you think are misrepresented, or any other creatures that you think deserve more recognition in stories? Because I don't know about you, but like I think I've seen enough of werewolves and vampires, personally. I have no idea if that's the same as you, but that's my personal take.
No, they absolutely saturate the fantasy. When you talk about supernatural beings, vampires and werewolves are like definitely center stage. But it's funny that you asked that, because here we are talking about Tolkien and all this kind of stuff. And I do a creature spotlight every month, and this month is going to be goblins.
Ooh.
And of course, goblins are all over fantasy fiction. What are you talking about? So goblins are an example of a supernatural creature that has drifted far away from its source material, or at least drawn from one depiction where all the other depictions have been forgotten or ignored. Goblins are usually these little green-skinned ankle biters with sword, they're like little medieval warriors and stuff. There's lots of stories out there back in the day showing them as, coming into your house and fixing your shoes or getting you something to drink, not always being the adversary, sometimes being the adversary, sometimes being evil, but very, very different versions of goblins out there that I don't know that we're seeing a lot in fantasy fiction.
Yeah, because like you mentioning that whole good-natured goblin, I do remember seeing that being touched on somewhere. But like I can't exactly pinpoint where, but I just remembered like, yeah, I have heard like goblins being good. Of course, why isn't that there more often?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and I understand, when Tolkien was like a juggernaut, he came in and he said goblins, and that kind of shifted the public view of goblins, especially after D&D took it over. It basically took the Tolkien view and published that. And now you see that kind of same depiction of goblins across the board, across role-playing games. It's like the role-playing goblin. It's always this green-skinned little, imp.
Yeah, the number of times that a first encounter in D&D, when you're like level 1 through 3, is a bunch of goblins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just one example, but there's a lot of examples of supernatural creatures that are underrepresented or kind of got glossed over.
Yeah, and I genuinely cannot wait to see these videos. I'm always like leaping to my computer as soon as I see them coming up, because I'm just like, yes, creatures.
Yeah.
I think we will finish it up there. Thank you so much, JM Celi. Is there anything that you want to, I guess, sign off with? Anything you want to promote? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say I am in the middle of drafting my query letter, and a copy of it is currently with an editor who's going to look over the letter itself and see if it hits all the kind of the buttons that a potential literary agent will be looking for when they read a query letter, basically me looking for a publisher. So the next step will be refining that query letter, getting it just right, and then finding literary agents to submit that to and try to pitch my book. And yeah, that'll be 2022 is the year that I'll be trying to find a publisher, basically. And that's where I am in the process. So you can read the first chapter of my book on jmceli.com. So if you're curious about A Flower in Hell and you want to sink your teeth into a little bit of it right now, come on by and check it out.
Awesome. I'll definitely be linking that in the description of this video, as well as links to all of JM Celi's social medias, his YouTube, his Instagram, all that jazz. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on here, JM Celi.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. I'm touched. I've always enjoyed your channel. It's a lot of fun, and it's nice meeting you, you know, in person.
Yeah, definitely, and so great to meet you as well. I was about to say in the flesh.
But yeah.
We are not in the flesh. This is a Zoom call. We live in completely different countries.
Yeah.
Thank you again, and thank you guys for tuning in to watch the Backspace. I will be seeing you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.